The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty platform of Copper Creek Station as Samuel Hart adjusted his worn leather hat and checked his pocket watch for the third time. The AT-47 from Denver was running late, carrying with it a cargo more precious and terrifying than any shipment of gold he'd ever handled. His bride, to be ordered through careful correspondence over 6 months, was arriving today to marry a man she'd never met face to face. Samuel's weathered hands trembled slightly as he folded the latest letter from Miss Eleanor Whitmore. Her delicate script had described a woman of 24 years, educated in Boston, seeking a new life in the territories after the death of her parents. What she hadn't mentioned, and what gnawed at Samuel's conscience like a persistent toothache, was that he'd stretched the truth considerably in his own letters. He'd described himself as a prosperous rancher when in reality, he was a part-time sheriff's deputy who could barely keep his small homestead afloat. The train's whistle echoed across the valley, and Samuel's heart hammered against his ribs. He'd practiced his greeting 100 times in the mirror, rehearsed explanations for why his ranch house was smaller than he'd described, why his cattle herd numbered 12 instead of hundreds. But as the great iron beast wheezed to a stop in a cloud of steam and cinders, all his carefully planned words evaporated like morning dew. Passengers began stepping down onto the platform, and Samuel scanned each face with growing anxiety. Well-dressed businessmen, a family with crying children, an elderly preacher with his worn Bible clutched tight, but no single woman matching Eleanor's description. The crowd thinned, porters began unloading cargo, and still no Eleanor. Samuel approached the conductor, a man he'd known for years. "Pete, was there a Miss Eleanor Whitmore on your passenger list?" Pete consulted his ledger and shook his head. "No, sir, Mr. Hart. No one by that name. Had a woman traveling alone, but she got off back in Lidville. Said she was having second thoughts about something." Pete's weathered face showed sympathy. "I'm sorry, Sam. Mail-order brides sometimes get cold feet." Samuel felt the weight of disappointment settle on his shoulders like a heavy winter coat. He'd spent his last savings on new clothes, had the preacher waiting at the church, even managed to buy a small bouquet of wildflowers that now felt foolish in his large hands. But more than the money or embarrassment, he felt the ache of loneliness that had driven him to seek a wife through letters in the first place. As he turned to leave the platform, a small voice caught his attention. "Mister, are you waiting for someone too?" Samuel looked down to see a little girl, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, with tangled brown hair and a smudged dress that had seen better days. Her eyes were the clearest blue he'd ever seen, filled with a hope that seemed far too mature for her young face. Beside her sat a battered carpetbag and what appeared to be a handmade doll crafted from corn husks. "Yes, little one. I was waiting for a lady, but she didn't come. Are you waiting for your family?" The girl's small shoulders sagged. "The train man said nobody came to get me either. He says I have to go to the orphanage in the next town." She picked up her doll and hugged it close. "But I don't want to go there. The other children said orphanages are scary places." Samuel knelt down to her level, his heart stirring with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "What's your name?" "Sweetheart, Lucy. Lucy May Parker. My mama died of the fever back in Kansas, and my daddy died in a mine accident before that. Mama's sister was supposed to meet me here. But..." Lucy's voice trailed off as she looked around the now empty platform. Pete the conductor approached them, his expression grave. "Mr. Hart, we got a telegram an hour ago. The girl's aunt died suddenly 3 days back. Consumption. There's no one else to claim her. I'm supposed to take her to the territorial orphanage when we head back east this evening." Samuel studied Lucy's small face, noting the determined set of her jaw despite the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. Something about her reminded him of himself at that age. Stubborn, hopeful against all odds, and desperately in need of someone to care. An idea began forming in his mind, crazy and impractical, but somehow feeling more right than anything had in years. "Lucy," he said gently, "what if you didn't have to go to the orphanage? What if you came home with me instead?" The little girl's eyes widened. "You mean it, mister? You'd want me?" "Well," Samuel said, scratching his beard thoughtfully, "I've got a small ranch about 10 miles out of town. It's not much, but there's plenty of room, and I could use the company. I was planning to share it with someone today anyway. What do you say?" Lucy threw her small arms around Samuel's neck with such force that it nearly knocked him over. "Yes! Oh yes, please! I chose you to be my daddy." Those words hit Samuel like a lightning bolt. In all his careful planning for Eleanor's arrival, He'd never considered that perhaps what he truly needed wasn't a wife, but a family. The thought terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork and arrangements. Judge Harrison, a fair man who'd known Samuel for years, agreed to expedite temporary guardianship papers. Doc Matthews gave Lucy a clean bill of health despite her obvious need for regular meals and proper care. By late afternoon, Samuel found himself riding home in his wagon with the most precious cargo he'd ever transported. Lucy chattered excitedly about everything she saw. The red rock formations, the vast expanse of prairie grass, a hawk circling overhead. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Samuel found himself pointing out landmarks and telling stories about the land they passed through. When they crested the hill that revealed his modest homestead, Samuel held his breath, waiting for Lucy's reaction. The ranch house was small and weathered, with a leaning fence that needed repair and a barn that had seen better days. The garden was overgrown with weeds, and the chicken coop stood empty except for 3 stubborn hens. It wasn't much to look at, certainly nothing like the grand spreads owned by the cattle barons further north. Lucy's eyes grew wide with wonder.
It's beautiful.
Is that really going to be my home? If you want it to be, Samuel said softly. It's not fancy, but it's honest land. Mama used to say that fancy things don't make a home. Love makes a home. Lucy clutched her corn husk doll tighter. And I already love it here. The first weeks were challenging in ways Samuel had never anticipated. Lucy was a whirlwind of energy and questions, turning his quiet, orderly existence upside down. She needed clothes that fit, proper schooling, guidance in manners and morals that he felt woefully unequipped to provide. There were nights when he lay awake wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake, if Lucy would be better off in an institution designed for orphaned children. But there were magical moments too. Lucy's laughter when he taught her to milk the 3 remaining cows. Her wide-eyed attention when he explained how to read weather patterns in the clouds. The way she hummed while helping him plant a new vegetable garden, her small hands surprisingly capable and willing. Most of all, there was the simple joy of having someone to come home to, someone who ran to greet him with genuine excitement when he returned from his deputy duties in town. The townspeople had mixed reactions to Samuel's sudden acquisition of a daughter. Some, like Doc Matthews and his wife Martha, offered help and advice freely. Others whispered behind their hands about the impropriety of a single man raising a girl child. The worst was Mrs. Thornbury, the banker's wife, who made pointed comments about proper Christian homes and what the child really needs. Samuel might have weathered the criticism alone, but he wouldn't stand for anyone making Lucy feel unwanted. When Mrs. Thornbury suggested loudly at the general store that Lucy would be better off with a real family, Samuel's temper finally snapped. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the authority he'd learned in his law enforcement work, "Lucy is with a real family, my family, and I'd appreciate it if you'd keep your opinions about my daughter to yourself." The store fell silent, and Mrs. Thornbury's face reddened, but Samuel noticed several other customers nodding approvingly, including Martha Matthews, who gave him an encouraging smile. That evening, as Samuel helped Lucy with her letters by lamplight, she looked up at him with those impossibly blue eyes. "Daddy Sam, why did that lady say mean things about us?" Samuel set down his coffee cup and considered his words carefully. "Some people think they know what's best for everyone else, Lucy girl. But they don't understand that families can be made in different ways. What matters isn't what other people think, it's how we care for each other. Like how you teach me things and make sure I eat my vegetables and read me stories." "Exactly like that." Lucy nodded solemnly. "Then we're a real family, even if we don't look like other families. The realest family I've ever had," Samuel admitted, surprising himself with the honesty of it. The seasons turned, and Lucy bloomed under Samuel's patient care. Her dresses, sewn by Martha Matthews and other kind women in town, began to fit properly. Her hair grew shiny and smooth when braided each morning. Most importantly, the haunted look that had shadowed her young face began to fade, replaced by the natural brightness of a child who felt secure and loved. Samuel discovered that fatherhood came to him as naturally as breathing. He found himself looking forward to her questions about everything from why grass was green to how stars stayed in the sky. He learned to braid her hair, to mend small tears in her clothing, to comfort nightmares about losing everyone she loved. In return, Lucy brought laughter and purpose to his previously solitary existence. The ranch began to improve as well. With Lucy's help in the garden and her cheerful company during the long hours of fence repair and animal care, Samuel found renewed energy for the work. They acquired more chickens, expanded the vegetable plot, and even managed to increase their small herd of cattle by 3 with careful trading and the money Samuel had saved for Eleanor's wedding dress. But it was the unexpected challenges that truly tested their bond. The first came on a cold October morning when Samuel was called out on deputy business. A band of cattle rustlers had been spotted near the Morrison Ranch, and Sheriff Davidson needed every available man to track them down. "I'll be back before supper," Samuel promised Lucy as he saddled his horse. "Stay close to the house, and if anything feels wrong, you ride Buttercup straight to town to Doc Matthews. You remember the way." Lucy nodded, but Samuel could see the fear in her eyes. He'd become her anchor in a world that had already proven it could snatch away everything she loved without warning. The rustlers proved more dangerous than expected. What should have been a simple arrest turned into a running-gun battle through the rocky canyons south of town. Samuel took a bullet in the shoulder and spent 2 days unconscious in Doc Matthews' clinic while Lucy waited, convinced she'd lost another father. When Samuel finally opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Lucy's tear-stained face beside his bed. She'd barely left his side, Martha Matthews later told him, refusing to eat or sleep properly until he woke up. "You came back," Lucy whispered, her small hand gripping his uninjured one. "I promised I would," Samuel said hoarsely. "And I always keep my promises to you. But what if something happens to you? What if I have to be alone again?" Samuel pulled her close with his good arm, feeling the weight of responsibility he'd never fully understood before. Lucy wasn't just depending on him for food and shelter. She was trusting him with her heart, her future, her ability to believe that love could be permanent. "Lucy girl, listen to me. I'm going to do everything in my power to be here for you. But if something ever did happen to me, you're strong enough and smart enough to be okay. You've got friends in this town now, people who care about you. And you've got something even more important." "What's that?" "You've got the knowledge that you're loved completely, just as you are. That changes a person, makes them brave in ways they never expected. Your mama gave that to you first, and now I'm giving it to you too. That kind of love doesn't disappear just because people do." Winter brought its own trials. A late blizzard caught them unprepared, snowing them in for nearly a week with dwindling supplies. Lucy came down with a fever that had Samuel pacing the cabin in worry, sleepless and restless, tending to her every need. But they weathered each storm together, emerging stronger and more bonded than before. It was during that long winter that Samuel began to notice changes in himself that went beyond simple fatherhood. Lucy's presence had awakened a tenderness he'd forgotten he possessed, a capacity for hope he'd thought buried under years of solitary living. More than that, caring for her had given him a sense of purpose that his previous life had lacked. Every decision he made now was filtered through the question of what would be best for Lucy, and somehow that made even the smallest choices feel meaningful. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers that covered the hillsides in brilliant color. Lucy delighted in picking bouquets for their simple kitchen table, chattering about which flowers meant what in the language of blossoms she'd learned from Martha Matthews. Samuel found himself seeing the land through fresh eyes, noticing beauty he'd been too busy or too lonely to appreciate before. It was on one of those perfect spring mornings that their peaceful world faced its greatest challenge. Samuel was in the barn tending to a mare that was ready to foal when he heard the sound of approaching horses. Through the open door, he saw 3 riders approaching the house, strangers by their look, and not the friendly sort. Samuel quickly saddled his horse and rode out to meet them, leaving Lucy safely inside with strict instructions to stay hidden. The men were hard-looking, with the kind of eyes that had seen too much violence and grown to like it. Their leader, a tall man with a scar running from his left ear to his jaw, spoke with a Texas drawl. "You'd be Samuel Hart." "I am." "What's your business here?" "We're looking for a little girl, Lucy May Parker. We have reason to believe she's been staying here unlawfully." Samuel's blood ran cold, but he kept his voice steady. "Lucy is my adopted daughter. All the paperwork is legal and filed with the territorial court." The scarred man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "See, that's where you're wrong, friend. Lucy May Parker is the daughter of my late business partner, Jake Parker. Jake owed me a considerable sum of money when he died in that mine accident. The way I see it, his daughter is collateral for that debt. That's not how the law works," Samuel said, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. Children aren't property to be traded for debts. Maybe not in your fancy territorial courts. The man replied, but out here, a debt is a debt. That little girl is coming with us, and she's going to work it off in my establishment in Denver. Don't worry, we'll take real good care of her. The implication made Samuel's stomach turn. He'd heard rumors about such places, where children disappeared into lives of unthinkable exploitation. Over his dead body would Lucy face such a fate? You'll have to go through me first, Samuel said quietly. Was hoping you'd see reason, but if that's how you want it. The scarred man's hand moved toward his weapon. The gunfight that followed was brief but decisive. Samuel's years of deputy work had honed his reflexes to a razor's edge, and righteous fury gave him an accuracy he'd never possessed before. When the smoke cleared, 2 of the men lay dead in his yard, and the third, wounded and demoralized, was riding hard back toward the main road. Samuel holstered his gun with shaking hands and ran toward the house, calling for Lucy. She emerged from her hiding place under the kitchen table, tears streaming down her face. Are they gone? Are you hurt? They're gone, sweetheart. But we need to pack quickly. That wounded man will be back with more friends, and I don't want you anywhere near here when that happens. They worked together in efficient silence, packing only essentials into saddlebags. Samuel loaded his rifle and revolver, gathered what cash he had hidden, and saddled both horses. Within an hour, they were riding hard toward the mountains, leaving behind the only real home either of them had known. The next few weeks tested every survival skill Samuel possessed. They moved from cave to abandoned cabin to friendly ranches, always staying ahead of the men who pursued them. Samuel sent word to Sheriff Davidson. But the sheriff's jurisdiction was limited, and the men chasing them seemed to have connections and resources that reached far beyond what Samuel had expected. During those hard days on the trail, Samuel and Lucy's bond deepened into something unbreakable. She never complained about the cold nights or the meager meals, never questioned why they had to keep moving. Instead, she helped him track game, gathered edible plants with knowledge that surprised him, and kept their spirits up with songs her mother had taught her. One evening, as they sat around a small campfire hidden deep in a pine grove, Lucy looked up at Samuel with those devastating blue eyes. "Daddy Sam, are you sorry you picked me instead of the lady on the train?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "Lucy, can I tell you something I've never told anyone else?" She nodded solemnly. "I was scared to death that morning at the train station. I'd told Miss Eleanor things about myself that weren't completely true, made myself sound more successful than I really was. I was afraid she'd take one look at me and get back on that train. But you're wonderful," Lucy protested. "Why would you think that?" "Because I'd been alone for so long that I forgot what I was worth. I thought I had to be someone different, someone better to deserve love. But you," Samuel reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You saw me exactly as I was that day, just a lonely man with flowers for a woman who didn't come. And somehow you decided I was worthy of being your father." "I didn't decide," Lucy said simply. "I just knew. The same way you know when it's going to rain or when a horse is going to be gentle. Some things you don't have to think about. You chose me," Samuel repeated, the words carrying a weight of wonder. "And choosing you back was the smartest thing I've ever done." They were discovered 3 days later by a group of territorial marshals led by a man Samuel recognized. Deputy Marshal William Cross, a fair man with a reputation for following the law rather than the highest bidder. Samuel emerged from their hiding place with his hands raised, Lucy behind him. "Sam Hart," Marshal Cross called out. "We need to talk." "If you're here to take Lucy, you'll have a fight on your hands," Samuel warned. "Easy there, Sam. I'm not here to take anybody anywhere. I'm here because Sheriff Davidson sent word about your situation, and we've been doing some investigating of our own." Marshal Cross dismounted and approached slowly, his hands visible and non-threatening. "Turns out that fellow who came after the girl, Marcus Slade, has been wanted by federal authorities for quite some time. Human trafficking, among other things. When word got out that he'd been killed in a legitimate shooting defending a child, well, let's just say there weren't many tears shed." Samuel felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. "So Lucy is safe, more than safe. The territorial governor himself signed papers making your adoption of Lucy May permanent and legal. Seems the story of a man defending an orphan child against criminals has caught the public imagination. You've got friends in high places now." "Sam," Lucy peeked out from behind Samuel's legs. "Does that mean we can go home?" Marshall Cross smiled and tipped his hat to her. "Yes, miss. You can go home." The ride back to the ranch was triumphant, but Samuel found himself nervous as they approached the familiar hills. Would the place feel the same after everything they'd been through? Would Lucy still want to live there after experiencing the wider world? Dangerous as it had been, his worries proved groundless. As they topped the ridge and saw their home spread out below them, Lucy let out a whoop of joy that echoed across the valley. The neighbors had been busy in their absence. The fence was repaired, the garden weeded, and smoke rose from the chimney indicating someone had prepared for their return. Doc and Martha Matthews emerged from the house as they rode up, followed by Sheriff Davidson, Pete the conductor, and nearly a dozen other townsfolk. Even Judge Harrison was there, beaming with satisfaction. "Welcome home," Martha called out, rushing to help Lucy down from her horse. "We've got supper waiting and fresh bread in the oven." The evening that followed was unlike anything Samuel had ever experienced. His kitchen, which had been designed for solitary meals, overflowed with friends and neighbors celebrating their safe return. Lucy was the center of attention, regaling everyone with carefully edited tales of their adventure, while Samuel looked on with paternal pride. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Samuel and Lucy found themselves alone on the front porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Lucy sat curled against his side, her corn-husk doll in her lap. "Daddy Sam." "Yes, sweetheart. I'm glad the train lady didn't come that day." Samuel chuckled. "Why's that?" "Because if she had come, you wouldn't have seen me. And I really needed you to see me. I needed you to see me too, Lucy girl. More than I knew." Lucy was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you think my mama and daddy would be happy that I chose you?" Samuel considered the question carefully. "I think they'd be grateful that their little girl found someone who loves her as much as they did. And I think they'd be proud of how brave and kind you've become. And I think your mama and daddy would be proud too," Lucy said with the startling wisdom that children sometimes possess. "Because you saved me, but I saved you too, didn't I?" Samuel felt tears prick his eyes. "Yes, Lucy, you saved me too." The years that followed were filled with the ordinary miracles of family life. Lucy grew from a scared little girl into a confident young woman under Samuel's patient guidance. She learned to ride like a cowboy, shoot straight enough to protect herself, and manage the household accounts with a skill that impressed the banker who'd once employed the critical Mrs. Thornbury. Samuel discovered talents he'd never known he possessed. He became an expert at braiding hair, mending torn dresses, and explaining the mysteries of growing up to a young woman who trusted him completely. He attended school performances, taught Lucy to drive the wagon, and worried through her first heartbreak with the same intensity he'd once reserved for tracking dangerous criminals. The ranch prospered under their joint efforts. Lucy's suggestions for improving their vegetable sales at the Saturday market proved brilliant, and her natural way with animals led to a thriving side business in training horses for wealthy ranchers. Samuel expanded his role with the sheriff's department, eventually becoming chief deputy, a position that commanded respect throughout the territory. But more than their material success, Samuel treasured the small moments that defined their relationship. Lucy singing while she worked in the garden, the serious conversations they had about right and wrong, about the complexities of adult life she was beginning to understand, the way she still ran to greet him when he came home, even as she grew too old for him to swing her up in his arms. The most challenging period came when Lucy turned 16 and began receiving attention from young men in town. Samuel struggled with the desire to protect her from any potential heartbreak while recognizing her need to grow into her own person. It was Lucy herself who helped him navigate this delicate transition. "Daddy Sam," she said one evening as they sat on their porch, now expanded and furnished with comfortable chairs, "I know you worry about me and boys." Samuel nearly choked on his coffee. "What makes you say that?" "Because you get that wrinkle between your eyebrows whenever Tommy Morrison talks to me after church. And you clean your gun every time Billy Hawthorne comes to call." "I do not," Samuel began, then stopped, realizing she was absolutely right. "Okay, maybe I do worry a little." "You don't have to worry so much. You taught me to know my own worth, remember? You taught me that I deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. Any boy who doesn't meet those standards isn't worth my time." "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher," Lucy said with a grin that still reminded him of the little girl who'd chosen him to be her father. The ultimate test of their relationship came when Lucy was 18 and received a letter that changed everything. It was from a lawyer in Boston, informing her that a distant relative had died and left her a substantial inheritance. Enough money to attend university, to travel, to live the kind of life her educated mother had always envisioned for her. Samuel read the letter with a heavy heart, knowing that Lucy deserved every opportunity the world could offer, while simultaneously dreading the possibility of losing her. They sat together at their kitchen table, the same table where she'd practiced her letters as a child, and discussed her options with the honesty that had always characterized their relationship. "It's enough money to go anywhere, do anything," Samuel said quietly. "Your mother would have wanted you to have those choices." "And what do you want?" Lucy asked, studying his face carefully. "I want whatever makes you happy. If that means going to Boston or New York or anywhere else your heart calls you, then that's what I want." Lucy was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the land they'd worked together, the mountains that had sheltered their small family, the life they'd built from nothing but love and determination. "Daddy Sam, do you remember what you told me about families being made in different ways?" "Of course." "Well, I've been thinking about that a lot lately. I could go to Boston and get an education and see the world. Or I could stay here and use that money to improve our ranch, maybe start a proper horse training business, build the life I want right here in the place I love most." "Lucy, you don't have to." "I'm not staying because I have to," she interrupted gently. "I'm staying because I want to. This is my home. You're my father. This is where I belong." Samuel felt tears spill down his cheeks without shame. "Are you certain? I don't want you to have regrets later. The only regret I'd have is if I left and missed out on continuing to build this life with you. Besides," Lucy grinned, "someone needs to keep an eye on you. Make sure you don't try to court any more mail-order brides. I think my bride ordering days are behind me." Samuel laughed through his tears. Lucy used her inheritance wisely, expanding their ranch into one of the most successful horse training operations in the territory. She never married, though she had several devoted suitors over the years. Instead, she channeled her nurturing instincts into the land, the animals, and the community that had embraced them both. Samuel often marveled at the twist of fate that had brought them together. He'd gone to that train station expecting to meet a woman who would complete his life, only to discover that completeness came instead from a little girl who needed exactly what he had to offer. Their love wasn't romantic or passionate in the way novels described. It was something deeper and more enduring. It was the love of choice, of commitment, of two souls who recognized in each other exactly what they'd been searching for. On Samuel's 60th birthday, Lucy surprised him with a gift that took his breath away. She'd had a photographer come out from Denver to take a formal portrait of them together, but it was the inscription she'd had engraved on the frame that made him weep. "To Daddy Sam, who saw me when no one else was looking. Love, your chosen daughter, Lucy May Hart." "Hart?" Samuel questioned, noting that she'd taken his surname rather than keeping Parker. "I've been your daughter in every way that matters for over a decade," Lucy said simply. "I thought it was time to make it official." As Samuel looked at their portrait, his weathered face and her bright, confident expression, he thought about the man he'd been that day at the train station. Lonely, dishonest with himself, desperate for connection but afraid of real intimacy. That man had been waiting for someone else to complete him, not understanding that the most profound love often comes disguised as something entirely different than what we think we want. The little girl who'd chosen him to be her father had taught him that family isn't about blood or law or social expectations. Family is about showing up, day after day, with patience and love and the willingness to grow into the person your loved ones need you to be. It's about choosing each other, again and again, through hardships and joys, disappointments and triumphs. Years later, when Samuel's hair had gone completely white and his hands had grown too stiff for detailed ranch work, he would sit on their expanded porch and watch Lucy training the young horses with the same patience and wisdom he'd once used to raise her. Sometimes visitors would comment on how lucky he'd been to find such a devoted daughter. Samuel would smile and rock slowly in his chair, remembering a scared little girl on a train platform and a lonely man who'd thought his life was ruined because a mail-order bride hadn't shown up. He'd learned that luck had nothing to do with it. Love, real love, wasn't about getting what you thought you wanted. It was about recognizing what you actually needed when it appeared in an unexpected form. "I chose you to be my daddy," Lucy had said that first day, and in doing so, she'd chosen them both a future neither could have imagined. Samuel had gone to that station planning to claim a bride, but instead, he'd been claimed by something infinitely more precious: the unconditional love of a child who saw past his flaws to the father he was capable of becoming. The evening light painted the mountains in shades of gold and purple as Samuel reflected on the strange paths that lead people to their destinies. He'd spent years believing he was incomplete, searching for someone to fill the empty spaces in his life. But Lucy had taught him that love doesn't fill empty spaces, it creates new ones. Vast territories of the heart that expand to accommodate all the joy and worry and fierce protectiveness that come with caring deeply for another human being. Their story had become something of a legend in Copper Creek, told and retold at church socials and community gatherings. The lonely deputy who'd found his daughter when his mail-order bride failed to arrive. But Samuel knew the real story was quieter and more profound than any legend could capture. It was about two people who needed each other finding the courage to build a family from scratch, one day at a time, one choice at a time. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Lucy joined him on the porch as she did every evening. Now a woman of 28 with her own wisdom earned through years of love and loss and learning. She still carried the corn-husk doll he'd first seen her clutching at the train station, though it was carefully stored in a place of honor on her bedroom shelf. "What are you thinking about, Daddy Sam?" "Just remembering," he said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "Remembering the day I went to meet a stranger and came home with my daughter instead. Best mistake you ever made," Lucy teased gently. "No mistake about it," Samuel replied. "You chose me and I chose you back. That was the most intentional thing either of us ever did." Lucy leaned against his shoulder as she had when she was small, and Samuel felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. He'd never gotten the bride he'd ordered, never built the cattle empire he'd once dreamed of, never became the man he'd thought he wanted to be. Instead, he'd become something better, a father, a protector, a man whose love had helped shape a remarkable young woman who would carry his values forward into a world that desperately needed her strength and compassion. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods they'd planted together, carrying the scent of the wildflowers Lucy tended so carefully. Somewhere in the distance, one of their horses nickered softly to its companions. This was home, Samuel thought. Not the house or the land, but this moment, this connection, this choice to love each other through everything life could throw at them. "Daddy Sam?" "Yes, Lucy. Thank you for seeing me that day. Thank you for choosing me," he replied, and meant it with every fiber of his being. As the night settled around them, Samuel Hart knew with absolute certainty that his life had unfolded exactly as it was meant to. The bride who hadn't come had led him to the daughter who had, and in that exchange, he'd discovered that the deepest happiness comes not from getting what we think we want, but from recognizing the gifts we never knew we needed.